microphone. Can everyone hear me? This way? Okay. Thank you. I've been asked to give a short overview of the conflict in Northern Ireland before we begin. So when we speak about the specifics of the groups there, for those who aren't familiar, it makes sense. Now, as you all know, and as our dear friend, the Ambassador Kelly from Ireland knows, to do any conflict justice in 10 minutes is not possible. So please know that this is a very big simplification as we will go forward. I also, before I begin, want to clarify that I'm not here to copy and paste peace processes. I don't believe in that. There are a lot of similarities between our conflict here and the conflict in Northern Ireland, but there are also several differences, several major differences. So what is interesting to me is to look at the different processes that the specific groups went through in moving away from extremism, away from violence, and then looking at what might be relevant for the region here. So let's begin. The conflict in Northern Ireland dates back around 850 years with the islands of Ireland and Great Britain. At the time, Ireland was a collection of rival kingdoms. And for the first time, you had the English army. It's too far away for me to actually reach here. The English army brought over by one of those Irish kings to the island of Ireland, intervening in a dispute for his throne. From that point on, 850 years ago, there have been English rule in parts of Ireland. Fast forward to 400 years ago, with the British Empire, which was now Protestant, and Ireland, which was Catholic at the time, still is, the first systematic, successful attempt by the British Empire to take over parts of Ireland. It started in the north, in the northern part of Ireland, where the British government sent citizens from Scotland, the top of Great Britain, over to settle the land in Northern Ireland. A few decades later, the British government took over the rest of the island of Ireland. So now we have both Ireland and Great Britain under the United Kingdom under British control. This launched centuries of discrimination of two classes, a powerful class holding on to resources and wealth, and an underprivileged class with huge inequality, creating a lot of resentment between the two cultures, from the Irish culture to the British culture. 80 years ago, we have the situation that we have today, which was the partition of the island of Ireland. After an independence war that the Irish fought against Great Britain, Britain handed over most of Ireland to the Irish Catholics. It held on to the northern part of the island, and that is the creation of the modern state of Northern Ireland. Britain held on to the north because the majority of people living there were, and still are, British Protestants. So you have two very distinct narratives. On one side, you have Irish Catholics, who, as Naveen said, want all of Ireland to be united. They want to kick the British out. And the narrative is one of having been victimized by a powerful, oppressive authority. No one is going to hand us our rights. We have to gain them by force. Centuries of oppression, centuries of rebellion. On the other side, and this is, for example, a wall painting in Belfast representing an Irish event, the famine, and it's framed as Britain's genocide by starvation, Ireland's Holocaust, 1845 to 49. So there is very much in this mentality the suffering at the hands of the British. Now, on the other side, you have the British Protestants who were given land by their government to settle in Northern Ireland. They see themselves as having brought democracy to a backwards country, a backwards land that was not a country at the time, bringing progress, coming into a hostile territory where people didn't want them, where they were hated. So they have what you could call a siege mentality, where they need to hold on to every bit of territory and power that they have, because if they don't, they will lose their freedom, they can lose their security, their safety. Here, for example, a wall painting in Belfast by a Protestant militant organization. And it says, "For as long as 100 of us Protestants remain alive, we shall never in any way consent to the rule of the Irish. For it's not for glory we fight, but for freedom alone." So there's very much in their mentality a belief of no surrender, no compromise. If you lose, you will lose everything if you can't keep and win everything. And on both sides, in both narratives, there is a zero-sum mentality. Meaning, if something is good for you, it must be bad for us. Okay, so in this conflict, it's not about Catholicism and Protestantism. There are elements of religion, but there are elements of power, of land ownership, of rights, identity. And in the modern conflict that we're going to be talking about mostly today, beginning in 1968, where we had a civil rights movement, which was majority organized by the Catholic community in Northern Ireland, and it was nonviolent, demanding political rights, economic rights. It was met by harsh authority by the British forces, the British government that felt threatened by the civil rights movement. And as a result, the IRA turned this campaign into a struggle for independence. No longer civil rights, full independence. Kick the British out. The Irish Catholics had not felt safe at the hands of the British. At the same time, you had Protestants organizing into their own militant organizations for very similar reasons. We're not safe, we're being attacked, and we need to keep our country British. You had security forces, the British Army was brought in, and the local police to manage, to contain the conflict. They saw themselves as stabilizers of the region. But naturally, they were seen by the Irish Catholics, as just another symbol of the oppressor. So 30 years of bloodshed. In a tiny population of 1.7 million, you had 14,000 bombings in these 30 years, 34,000 shootings, 3,700 people killed, 35,000 people injured. This is a huge proportion in a tiny space. Now, today, it's nothing like this in the past, and we're going to talk about, with Gary, how we got to the peace. But I'd like to describe what the peace looks like, what it actually is. In 1998, there was a peace agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, but it was not a final status agreement. So it was not just sign a paper, we have reconciliation of what the status of Northern Ireland will be, let's go home. No, 18 years ago, there was an agreement, and ever since then, on a daily basis, it's been a situation of peace processing. Not an end of conflict, but an end to the violence for the most part. It's nonviolent, inclusive management of a shared society. You have bitter enemies who would have killed each other now sitting in government and in a power-sharing arrangement, and you turn on the television, instead of hearing arguments of ideology, you hear debates about healthcare and education and delivery of services. They're negotiating how to accommodate each other's identity. On the leadership level, at least, it is no longer a zero-sum game. Now, to be clear, there's still a lot of problems in Northern Ireland. The conflict is not completely solved. There are more walls in Belfast today than there were during the violent conflict. But two major things happened, and we'll talk about how it happened. First, the war strategy was reframed. You had the militant organizations on both sides reframing their strategy from an armed struggle to an unarmed struggle. This was very important because it allowed their communities, their constituents, and their fighters within their organizations to move away from violence in a strategic way. They did not change their goal. They were still fighting for their goal, but they decided they committed to doing it in a political, democratic way. Untouched was the morality, the legitimacy of their violent struggle of the past. They did not betray their dead comrades. They did not abandon their cause. You also have the confidence in the political system. This is a major thing that brought in the extremes on the militant groups, as well as the conservatives, the power holders in government that had boycotted the peace process. Eventually, there was a confidence in the political system, in the new political system, to meet all of their needs, to meet their security needs, their identity needs, their political rights. And this is the confidence that basically led to the inclusion of all these groups.